Tonight, breaking news as we come on the air. The new guidance from the CDC just in when it comes to quarantining after you test positive. The guidance changing yet again what now happens after that initial 5-day quarantine. This as President Biden faces growing pressure over testing as states plead for help. What's the status on those at-home tests the president promised last month? The other major concern, the number of kids now hospitalized with the virus higher than ever before. Tonight, Top Story speaks to the mother of one 6-year-old girl in the hospital for 18 days. Her warning to other parents as we take you inside one of the country's largest labs. A doctor telling us nearly all their positive cases are Omicron. Ice jam, winter weather trapping thousands of drivers on I95, some for more than 30 hours. Our Josh Letterman stuck on the roadway overnight with his dog and nowhere to go. He takes us inside the ordeal as temperatures dropped and the hours passed. Assassination attempt caught on camera. The shocking video from Haiti showing the country's prime minister coming under fire as he left a church. His security using a bulletproof vest to shield him. The shooting just months after Haiti's president was killed. State of extremism. The former Texas realtor now in prison for her role during the January 6th insurrection, which she documented on social media. What she told our Kate Snow about the siege, including what led her to the Capitol that day and why she says what would later turn into a deadly riot at the time seemed, quote, beautiful. Missing child mystery, the 7-year-old girl who has not been seen in 2 years, but police just learned about her disappearance last week. And flight or fight. Mass cancellations plaguing airlines this holiday season. The action you can take if your flight was grounded. Plus, how to get a real refund. Top Story starts right now. And good evening, I'm Tom Llamas. We want to get right to that breaking news. It could be frustrating. The CDC once again updating quarantine guidelines as COVID cases soar. The agency now saying if an infected person is still testing positive after 5 days, they should continue to isolate until day 10. If they receive a negative test, only 5 days is required. But the country is facing a massive testing shortage with sites running out of supplies and at-home tests difficult to find. President Biden today calling the situation frustrating, but he says the White House is trying to get more tests to Americans as the White House misses their deadline on those promised at-home tests they were going to deliver. And the president pointed to Google for help. The U.S. seeing a record 1 million new cases in just a single day, with children hit especially hard tonight. Top Story speaks to one mother whose 6-year-old has been hospitalized with the virus for weeks. She's now urging parents to get their kids vaccinated. We'll get to that story in just a few moments, but we want to begin tonight with Peter Alexander, who leads us off from the White House.
Tonight, another COVID record setter. More than 1 million new infections reported nationwide in just 24 hours, though some of it likely due to a holiday backlog. Nearly 1 in 100 Americans now testing positive in just the last week. Hospitalizations up 41% in 2 weeks. President Biden tonight saying the unvaccinated are hardest hit.
There's no excuse for anyone being unvaccinated.
It's a critical moment for the president, who came to office vowing to shut down the virus, but now faces an unprecedented COVID surge. The president under fire for not being prepared on testing. Last month, he promised free at-home tests for Americans starting now.
Rapid tests will start going out in the beginning of January because they're being produced now.
But today, the White House acknowledging it still has not finalized a contract with test manufacturers, nor unveiled its website to order tests. Meanwhile, President Biden's advising Americans to use Google.
I know this remains frustrating. Believe me, it's frustrating to me. But we're making improvements. COVID test near me on Google to find the nearest site where you can get a test.
But states tonight are pleading for help.
We do not have enough testing to go around. I don't think any state has enough testing to go around.
And massive testing lines remain from coast to coast.
You can't find an at-home rapid test in this area.
At least 21 states now reporting hospitalization records, and some healthcare centers are again overwhelmed and understaffed.
And so
Maryland declaring a state of emergency.
The next 4 to 6 weeks will be the most challenging time of the entire pandemic.
In Rhode Island, 2 medical centers calling COVID-positive healthcare workers back to the job if they have mild symptoms. The impact growing on schools, too. The Chicago Teachers Union voting tonight whether they'll refuse to report in person beginning tomorrow and instead teach remotely. Many schools in Philadelphia now joining Atlanta, Newark, and Milwaukee temporarily going remote due to rising cases and staff shortages.
It's like harder for me to learn because some of the stuff I don't know because it's new.
All right, Peter Alexander joins us now from the White House. Now, Peter, we understand there's some breaking news in tonight. The CDC has once again updated its isolation guidance for people who test positive. We know Dr. Fauci alluded to this earlier in the week. So what's happened?
Yeah, Tom, that's right. The CDC, as you know, has faced backlash for saying that Americans do not need a negative test to get out of isolation. Well, late tonight, the agency is still saying no negative test is required to get out of that recommended 5-day isolation period. You know, critics had questioned the policy since people could still be contagious then. But the CDC tonight also says that if you want to take a test and you test positive, you need to keep isolating for another 5 days. Tom?
All right, Peter Alexander leading us off from the White House tonight. Peter, thank you. And as cases continue to spike, an unprecedented number of children are getting sick with COVID. Hospitalization skyrocketing as the majority of children remain unvaccinated. Tonight, we hear from one 6-year-old battling COVID for nearly 3 weeks, her message from her hospital bed tonight, and what her mother wishes they had done differently. Here's NBC's Vaughn Hilliard.
The numbers are stark. The country's youngest generation contracting COVID at a higher rate than at any point during the pandemic. This, the rise in new hospitalizations of kids under the age of 18, meteoric compared to any other point during the pandemic.
Aria, how many days have you been at the hospital now?
18.
Among them, 6-year-old Aria Shapiro, who has been battling COVID at Phoenix Children's Hospital for 18 days, celebrating the holidays from her hospital bed.
COVID really put Aria on a turn that I've never seen her epilepsy go in.
Aria, who is epileptic, had received only her first dose of the vaccine. Her mom, Sarah, now says she wishes they had gone earlier.
From what I've seen with my own eyes, that COVID is not safe for all children. And though I know my daughter has an underlying condition, there's a lot of other people here that don't have underlying conditions where children are struggling with COVID.
As the Omicron variant sweeps through the nation, it's infecting kids, many of them with their families scrambling to get vaccinated as school goes back into session.
Kids are definitely not immune to this virus. Although most children do okay, they have an upper respiratory condition or situation happening. There are some cases that are extremely serious.
All our friends are getting COVID. There's like half of our class is not here. Yeah.
Cases among children are up more than 60%, with 300,000 new infections reported in the week after Christmas alone. Most of those cases are mild, but over that same time period, 574 kids on average every day have been admitted to the hospital. That's double from the week before.
Before we had break here, it wasn't hard because there was like nobody out. But now there's like 5 or 6 kids out right now. And it's harder because a lot of them are our friends. So for me, I'm just worrying about them now because I hope they're okay.
Despite the FDA approving the booster shot for kids 5 years and older just this week, most young kids in America have still yet to get even a single shot. Have you gotten vaccinated yet?
Not yet.
Not yet. Has this led you to think more about getting vaccinated?
A little.
In the 2 months since the shots were authorized for children ages 5 to 11, just over 15% have been fully vaccinated. That number higher for children ages 12 to 17 at 53%, but still well below the average for adults. How much more worried should parents be about their kids?
They should always be worried about the Omicron variant because they never know how their child is going to react if they get infected.
Many of them with their families scrambling to get vaccinated as school goes back into session. Your second shot.
Yeah.
Hey, so you're getting your vaccine. You're ready to go. Why did you decide to get your COVID vaccine?
Because I don't want to get sick.
This as other kids like Aria continue their fights in America's hospitals. What would you tell other kids that are watching?
Be brave. Be brave.
And little Aria is so brave. Vaughn Hilliard joins us now live on Top Story. So Vaughn, my first question is how is little Aria doing? We know she's 6 years old and she's been in that hospital for 18 days. Any sign of when she may get out?
18 days. There's a champion right now in Arizona, Tom. And this was particularly concerning early on. She had multiple seizures there from her epilepsy. She was on a ventilator for several days. You just saw her there. She was back sitting up, propped up. Her mom and her, they say that she hopes to be out in the coming days, Tom.
All right, that's great news. And then, Vaughn, we're talking a lot about the rising numbers of kids who are being hospitalized with COVID, but health officials are also pointing out a little caveat to a lot of those stats.
Right. I think it's important that health officials are urging folks to take into account what this means. There's a great number of kids who, whether it be broken bones, sprained ankle, they're showing up to the hospital not even realizing they have COVID. They come in, get tested, find out they have COVID. But what does that mean? Well, it speaks to just how contagious the Omicron variant is. There have been kids with broken bones, sprained ankles who have been showing up at the hospital for the last year and a half, but you're seeing a greater percentage of them testing positive for COVID than ever before. And what does that ultimately mean? It means that there is greater community spread among kids, and it puts kids like Aria at greater risk of contracting the virus, something so many, like Aria's parents, have been trying to avoid for now nearly 2 years, Tom.
Yeah, it is spreading like wildfire, no doubt, and we will keep Aria in our prayers tonight. All right, Vaughn Hilliard, great story. Thanks for joining us tonight. For more on the new CDC guidance and the White House's plan to battle Omicron, let's bring in NBC News medical contributor Dr. Natalie Azar. Dr. Azar, who usually joins us on set, is at home tonight because, of course, the COVID protocols here on this show. But I want to start with the CDC because, we have to be honest here. It's confusing and it's getting frustrating for so many people out there when the rules seem to change so much and we're 2 years into this pandemic. Dr. Azar, if you can just, in the most simplest form, break down the new rules for our viewers tonight.
I wish I could do it simply for you, Tom, but unfortunately, I was discussing it with one of our colleagues on the medical unit. What we really need is sort of a diagram with a yes, no, those diagrams and sort of algorithms in terms of what to do. There's a lot of redundancy in the guidelines. And I think if you're really trying to figure out what you should do, you might be scratching your head a little bit. What I think stands out to me, as was pointed out in the lead, is that the CDC is not requiring a negative test to get out of isolation. And look, to give them a little bit the benefit of the doubt, the whole idea here and the approach and the reason for these guidelines is for harm reduction, meaning we don't want people to be out of their work. We don't want people to be out of school for longer than is necessary. But what I'm seeing here from them is a little bit more of this blunt tool. Isolation is 10 days. Isolation is 5 days. If you can get a test and you have access to one, great. If you can't, you got to stay in isolation. That's not precision medicine. We have really good, interesting data out of the UK that came out about a week ago, showing that at about 5 days, 31% of individuals are still infectious. At 7 days, 16% are still infectious. And this is from days from a positive test. And at 10 days, 5% are still infectious, Tom, which means that 5 days is not arbitrary necessarily, but clearly not 100% of people who are infected with COVID-19 will be virus-free. I think you're going to hear a lot of backlash from this. Again, I think the CDC and folks are going to have a lot of explaining to do tomorrow about really the rationale behind this recommendation. Tom.
Dr. Azar, let's go back to Vaughn's report. 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, kids weren't catching COVID this quickly, right? Yes, they're not vaccinated, but they weren't vaccinated 2 years ago. Is it because Omicron is so much more contagious?
Well, that's right. There's no evidence yet at all, Tom, to suggest that the virus is able to infect children more easily or that it's more virulent in kids. I think we're really dealing, as Vaughn said, partly because kids are getting admitted with other things and are incidentally noted to be infected. But it's just the sheer number of cases that we're seeing kids also make up a significantly higher proportion of cases. The ratio of infections from adults to children, it used to be about 50 adults to one child. It's in the 30s now. So that ratio ratio is narrowing, and that really should concern every single parent out there. I cannot stress that enough. Even if your child doesn't end up hospitalized, COVID-19 is not necessarily a benign illness, even in a healthy child.
What kind of advice do you have for your friends, for your family, for your patients? It's so hard to get tested out there. Is there any easy way without having to wait in lines like here in New York City for hours, you know, in 30, 40-degree temperatures?
You know, Tom, what I've done in my group of friends is we share. You know, if one of us has an extra home test lying around and we're not using them, we drive to each other's homes and we share. And the other thing that we've been doing, and I have a network of, you know, friends and colleagues, some of whom are at NBC also, who alert me when, you know, Walgreens is now, you know, restocked. And I think you just have to keep on looking and going from pharmacy to pharmacy. Eventually you'll find, and just, you know, really remember that if you're symptomatic and you can't get a test, you need to act like you are infected until you can determine, you know, with some degree of assuredness and accuracy that you are in fact negative, because you will spread that to a lot of people.
Dr. Natalie Azar, tonight, we thank you for your time and for your guidance. A lot of questions tonight. You helped us out, so we appreciate it. Coming up in our next half hour, we're going to take you inside a testing facility to show you what they're seeing and how fast the Omicron variant is spreading. Again, that's in our next half hour. We want to turn out to the travel nightmare. Thousands of drivers stranded on I-95 overnight after tractor trailers jackknifed in a winter storm, trapping the vehicles without emergency assistance and dwindling water and food in freezing temperatures. NBC correspondent Josh Letterman was one of those drivers stuck for more than 11 hours. He takes us through his long trip home.
For thousands, it's a never-ending traffic nightmare. Some still stuck 36 hours and counting. It started like weather delays normally do. Traffic on the interstate slowing to a crawl as a dangerous mix of ice and piled up snow made the roadway nearly impassable. But by 7:30 p.m., traffic came to a total halt and stayed that way for thousands of us.
As it got past 5 hours, it was like, okay, this is a little scary. I don't know how long I'm going to be here. I don't have any food or water.
A quick glance around the highway made it clear why. A snowstorm littering the roadway with disabled vehicles by the dozens. Cars, pickups, even tractor trailers jackknifed, unable to be reached by emergency vehicles, eventually shutting down a 50-mile stretch of I-95. Travelers trapped as temperatures plunged below 27 degrees.
A lot of people around midnight started turning their cars off, trying to conserve gas, because we didn't know, is this going to clear up any minute, or are we going to be here all night long?
I had a nearly full tank of gas, but how long would it last? How long would my dog and I stay warm if the fuel ran out? By midnight, it became clear help wasn't coming anytime soon.
There's no point in even calling 911 or anything right now. There's no way for anybody to get to you. And there are hundreds of cars as far as the eye can see. Everyone is stuck in the same position. Nobody's able to move.
Isaac Arcos, a Marine heading home from break to his base in Virginia, conserved gas by using alarm reminders to turn off his vehicle every half hour.
It was kind of like losing hope. Everybody just turned off their vehicles almost at once. And once I reached that point, I too found myself doing that.
11 hours later, just before sunrise, the first trickle of movement ahead as northbound traffic began inching forward once again. But on the southbound side, no luck. A sea of headlights and idling vehicles for miles and miles, still waiting for their rescue from the night spent on I-95. One of those stuck? Vinaya Messiah, a mother who was trapped with her children for more than a day.
I kept thinking, you know, they're going to die in this cold. It was freezing. Like, my daughter's cheeks were so cold.
Messiah and her children sleeping overnight in an ambulance. Her kids without food, still 2 hours away from home.
We're willing to do whatever to get the kids, you know, some food and...
All right, Josh Letterman joins us now from Washington, D.C. A good reminder, your experience and your story there, to keep one of those emergency bags in your car if you live anywhere where there's this type of extreme weather. We're so glad you're back home safely tonight, but some people are still out there trying to make it to their destination. Do we have any new reporting?
Yeah, Tom, throughout the day, crews have been working feverishly to remove stuck cars as well as snow and ice from the roadway. As of about an hour ago, Virginia authorities say no one else is still stranded on the roadway, but they still have about 20 cars they are trying to remove from Interstate 95. A lot of those folks who were rescued, they were simply transiting through. So now they are stranded for the time being in Virginia, waiting for the roadways to improve so they can go on to wherever they were trying to drive. One of those who was stuck on the roadway, Senator Tim Kaine of the state of Virginia. He spent 26 and a half hours stuck in traffic trying to get to the Capitol, finally arriving there this evening, saying in that 26 and a half hours, he had one orange and one Dr. Pepper, Tom.
Yeah, he surprisingly looked okay coming out of this car. I saw that video. You know, I know a lot of our viewers are going to ask, how's your dog Jonas doing tonight?
Jonas is doing great. I think it took him a little while to understand that he was not being punished, that this was not about him, but he quickly got a chance to run around in the snow here in Washington, and now he's in a much better mood.
All right, Josh Letterman, we're glad you're okay, and our thoughts are still with all those drivers stuck out there. Josh, thank you. Now to the shocking images coming out of Haiti. We showed you these at the top of the broadcast. Unknown gunmen ambushing the country's prime minister and acting president in a failed assassination plot. The video capturing the moments his bodyguards scrambled to shield him from the bullets, and this coming just months after assassins killed Haiti's last president in his own home. NBC's Rahima Ellis has more.
Tonight, the shocking new video emerging. Haitian Prime Minister and acting President Ariel Henry and his security team coming under heavy gunfire on Saturday in an assassination attempt at an event commemorating the country's Independence Day. His team can be seen trying to shield him with a bulletproof vest while scrambling to take cover behind a vehicle. Then, with gunfire still erupting, the group in a dash running to their caravan of vehicles. The car speeding away, the Prime Minister safe inside. Local media reports saying one person was fatally shot, 2 injured, but an official casualty count has not been released. The gunman still unknown. The Prime Minister's office saying that, quote, bandits and terrorists had tried to shoot Henry. This comes just months after the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse back in July by a group of armed men. Prime Minister Henry became the de facto leader of the country less than 2 weeks later. Haitian authorities have arrested 18 Colombians and 2 Haitian Americans in connection with Moïse's killing. But just this week, another suspect was detained by U.S. authorities in Panama. Gang violence, kidnappings, bloody protests over food and fuel shortages, and a devastating earthquake last year have shaken the vulnerable Caribbean nation to its core. And now, another blatant attack to the country's highest office as the nation struggles to rebuild. Rahima Ellis, NBC News.
We thank Rahima for that report. Back here at home, the country approaching the 1-year anniversary of the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol. Just moments ago, former President Trump announcing he is canceling a news conference that was scheduled on that day at Mar-a-Lago. And tonight we take a look inside the siege. Our Kate Snow spoke to a Texas woman right before she went to prison for her role in the riot.
We're going to go down and storm the Capitol. That's why we came, and so that's what we're going to go do. So wish me luck.
USA! Texas realtor Jenna Ryan became one of the most visible participants on January 6th, thanks to her own social media posts. She was invited to fly to D.C. on a private jet by an acquaintance to attend a rally protesting the results of the 2020 election. She documented every move. Posts that became evidence used against her in court.
We're all going to be up here, and we're going to be breaking those windows.
Ryan says in the end she was never violent, but pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor for illegally entering the Capitol building.
You did walk into the Capitol, Jenna.
I did.
You wrote on Twitter the next day, "We just stormed the Capitol. It was one of the best days of my life."
You know what? I feel like walking into the Capitol for 2 minutes and 8 seconds was a big mistake. And I pled guilty to that, and I have remorse for that.
The mob ahead of you was breaking windows and forcing their way in.
Okay, well, you would have to be there to really understand the whole situation. People see footage on TV that I wasn't privy to. So to me, it was like we were saying, excuse me, people were polite, and it was
beautiful.
Seamus Hughes with George Washington University is closely tracking the January 6th cases.
You're only in there for 2 minutes, but let's put it in context. 1,000 other people were there too. 100 police officers were attacked that day. $1 million worth of property damage. The certification of the election was delayed. I mean, these are serious events.
And every individual is a part of that.
Absolutely.
He says Ryan's 60-day sentence is one of the longest for those charged with nonviolent offenses.
Do you think the judge was trying to make an example of Jenna?
The judge wanted to put a point on it, that this was a crime.
After walking out of the Capitol, Ryan posted this photo of a broken window with a caption.
If the media doesn't quit lying, we're going to come after them next. So,
as a person in the media, that's
right.
a threatening thing to say.
It's protected. It's protected speech.
People will hear that and think, that's a violent thing to say. And you're showing a broken window next to you. That's what's hard for people to reconcile.
Okay, and so here you go. Back to mob mentality. You get in a crowd of people, and it creates a different environment.
We're going to go in here. Life or death. It doesn't matter.
In an interview with NBC's Cynthia McFadden last January, Ryan called herself a martyr.
I am being persecuted here.
She pushed her claim even further in our December interview, comparing herself to victims of genocide.
They are calling me entitled. They're making fun of my skin color. They're calling me an insurrection Barbie. They don't see me as a human. And so that is the epitome of a scapegoat, just like they did that to the Jews in Germany.
Do you compare what's happening to the Holocaust?
You know what's so sad? That I'm afraid to answer your question because I will be attacked for saying that. I mean, people say that that is what it's like. They're like, we feel like that's happening.
I think it's clear through her online postings and the letter to the judge that she's all over the map on whether she accepts responsibility for her actions.
I'm going to end up losing weight in prison.
Her posts have drawn fans and fury.
We hope you get beat in prison.
Some people see you as a giant attempt to get publicity.
Okay.
To make your name, to increase your following. What do you say to that?
You know, they do say that, and that is so, you know, I'll say yes.
But for the next 6 weeks, she's sitting in federal prison in Bryan, Texas.
All right, Kate Snow joins us now live. Kate, fascinating interview, and I'm curious. I think I know the answer to this question, but I want to ask you because you spent so much time with her. What was your impression of Jenna after you sat down with her? Do you think she is remorseful at all?
So at all, yes. You heard her say she regrets walking into the Capitol. And over again in our interview, Tom, she kept saying for 2 minutes in the Capitol, she kept emphasizing it was just that short period that she regrets. She does not regret traveling to Washington, going to the Capitol grounds, being in what she thinks of as a party atmosphere, and you know, in her view, protesting something that she felt very strongly about. She certainly doesn't have remorse about that.
Yeah, she described it as beautiful at one point in that interview there. I'm also curious, how has Kate's feelings for President Trump changed, or have they not changed at all?
Yeah, so Jenna is a Republican. She told me she loves the Florida governor right now, but she's also a huge fan of former President Trump. She sees no wrong done by him at all and said that she would very much support him if he decided to run in 2024.
Kate Snow on top story tonight for us. Kate, we thank you. We want to stay in Washington now. President Biden's approval rating as he nears 1 year in office. A new CNBC Change Research poll shows that only 44% of Americans approve of the job he's doing. NBC News political director Chuck Todd joins us now. He's also moderator of Meet the Press. And Chuck, before we dig into all the numbers, I do want to get your take on the president's comments today when it came to COVID testing in the U.S. It seems like there tends to be a blind spot there with the Biden administration. One number from this poll came out. Americans who were polled saying 55% disapprove of Biden's handling of the COVID pandemic. What was your take on his comments today?
Well, look, I thought they were in general realistic, and that's the decision they've made over the last month, is to be realistic politically, not realistic medically and what may be the best way to deal with this virus, but the best way to deal with it politically. So you say, look, we're going to keep the schools open and these things. But on testing, they've blown this from the beginning, and they really, you know, they only have themselves to blame. Candidate Biden promised that testing was going to be the front and center strategy. Everybody you talk to says it's the front and center strategy. And then the excuse behind the scenes has been, well, there wasn't a demand, so we didn't want to stockpile extra tests. Well, that means we've never learned how to prepare for a pandemic, right? It really is. There's no good answer, which may be why the president ignored so many of the testing-specific questions today.
As far as the numbers on approval, disapproval going into this, around 51% in April, it's at 44% now. What could this mean for the Democrats heading into the midterms?
Well, look, the presidential job rating for the incumbent party is the single most important measuring stick to find out, it's the barometer to test how well's the party going to do. The farther under 50, the worse off it is for the party in the White House, pure and simple. With him sitting under 45, that becomes, those are massive losses. 45 to 50, maybe it's minimal, maybe he can even hang on to the Senate. So that's how to read that approval rating. But Tom, a little bit of this is not on him. It's the circumstances. But some of it has been some terrible messaging. Some of it has been they haven't pushed back on some of the conservative talk on things like immigration. They haven't really addressed it. So they've drawn a lot of negative, I think, numbers here. Some of it is because they're the person in the seat right now, and you blame the person at the top. But I also think they've done a poor job of talking to voters where they are. Right? Voters are concerned about the cost of groceries right now. Voters are concerned about the COVID mess-ups. I think they need to do a lot more of that and a lot less of worrying about the politics of Washington.
That leads me into my next question again, and as we head into the midterms in November, there's a lot of time, but what sort of stuck out for me in this poll was what was important to voters, right? The first on the list was the economy. COVID was around, I think, number 6, and I believe immigration was even higher than that. What does that tell you and how they sort of frame their messaging in the months ahead?
Look, you got to go and meet voters where they're at. Why is the number one issue the economy? It really is about the cost of things and the scarcity of things. So I think at the end of the day, those are COVID related, so that doesn't help it any. And I think this is what puts it, unfortunately, there's not a lot of instant policy proposals you can snap your fingers and solve this problem. But I think it means they've got to focus here. And I'll tell you this, Tom, there's a lot of political pressure on the president in Washington to focus on voting rights. Look, the democracy issue is an existential threat. It's real. But voters, at the end of the day, worry about what's right in front of their face first. They know the democracy is a huge problem. But what's a big problem for them today? Paying their bills, right? Buying food. And I think you got to figure out how to balance these two challenges. And I think it's really going to become more acute for this White House as this year wears on.
Chuck Todd for us tonight. Chuck, we thank you. Still ahead tonight, the missing child mystery. Police just finding out a 7-year-old girl has not been seen in 2 years. How they learned about her disappearance. Plus, the fast food attack. Look at this. The search tonight for 2 suspects caught on camera beating a Burger King employee. What witnesses say sparked a violent confrontation, you won't believe it. And the protest getting a lot of buzz tonight. Why demonstrators brought 10,000 bees to Chile's capital city. Stay with us. Top story, just getting started on this Tuesday night. We return now with new developments of the disappearance of a 7-year-old New Hampshire girl. Police say the last time she was seen was back in 2019, but they're only now just learning about her being missing. Maura Barrett has the latest.
We're not searching for anybody right now other than Harmony.
Tonight, New Hampshire police trying to make up for 2 years of lost time, searching for 7-year-old Harmony Montgomery. The community now offering a reward of more than $12,000.
Nobody's seen this young girl since late of October in 2019. So what's happened in the last 2 years? Fair question, right? That's why I'm here today, because we need assistance. We need help.
Police say they received a report about Harmony's disappearance for the first time just last week, after the mayor's office passed along an email it received. The Manchester mayor's office wouldn't tell NBC News who it was from, but that the email expressed concern both about Harmony's whereabouts and the New Hampshire Division for Children, Youth, and Families. That's the agency which manages child protective and foster services. Police say the girl was last seen in Manchester when they were called to this home where Harmony lived in 2019. Investigators searched the home and surrounding neighborhood this weekend, though police say the family that lives there now is not connected with the case.
Nothing makes sense. Nothing.
Kevin Montgomery is Harmony's granduncle and says he too last saw her in the fall of 2019.
It's horrible. frustrated. If there was a crime committed, somebody knows.
The biggest question, why did it take 2 years for the little girl to be reported missing?
It's a question I've asked. I want to focus on locating her now and dedicating all of our efforts to that. And if there was some flaw in the system, I'm not saying there was, but if there was, where was it and how's it going to be addressed?
Harmony's biological brother was adopted by Blair Miller, a Boston 25 News reporter in D.C. Miller told his station that he and his husband considered adopting Harmony because the siblings were close in foster care.
We really didn't have a choice, and because what we were told by DCF in Massachusetts was that Harmony had been reunited with her father.
The police chief, determined to continue the search, getting emotional at the most recent press conference.
I'm appealing to everyone. Help us find this little girl. Someone knows something. Do what is right and call in.
This is all so incredibly sad. Maura Barrett joins us now from Chicago. So, Maura, my question to you is, do we know anything more about Harmony's family? I know a lot of times in these cases that involve children, it can be sort of hard to get information right away.
Right, and there's a lot that's unknown about her past specifically, Tom. I reached out to both the Massachusetts and the New Hampshire Departments of Children and Families, as we understand that Harmony might have been in foster care, so I was trying to understand where and when that might have existed. But both departments said or told me that due to state and federal privacy requirements, they can't confirm or deny specifics about a family's involvement with the department. But I do want to note that police have set aside a dedicated 24-hour tip line for anyone who might have new information about where Harmony could have been these past 2 years. Tom.
And we hope all this attention generates some tips. I know you'll stay on top of this story for us. Maura, thank you. When we come back, the activists arrested, the confrontation breaking out before a press briefing by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, the demands made by demonstrators. We'll show you the video. And those mass cancellations impacting millions of air travelers this holiday season. Up next, Stephanie Rule breaks down how you can get a real refund if your flight was canceled. Stay with Top Story. All right, back now with Top Story's news feed, and we begin with a tragic story out of North Carolina. Authorities say Trooper John Horton was killed after he was struck by another patrol car driven by his own brother. Both officers were responding to a traffic stop when one of them lost control. The detained driver was also killed. The search is on tonight for the suspects behind a brutal attack at a Burger King here in New York City. This is the surveillance video. It shows one person jumping over the counter, and he begins to beat an employee. A second suspect then punches the victim from the other side. The worker held down until his colleagues intervened. He's expected to be okay, thankfully. Get this, witnesses say the suspects were angry and started the fight because their food was taking too long. All right, police in Florida arrested a community activist who demanded to speak with Governor Ron DeSantis over his COVID-19 response. Here's the video. It shows 71-year-old Ben Frazier being led away in handcuffs after he refused to leave a media briefing in Jacksonville before the governor arrived. Frazier saying it was a public building and that he had a right to be there, but aides for DeSantis said the briefing was for media members only. Other activists were also removed. A New York prosecutor today throwing out a groping charge against former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. He was charged in October with a forcible touching after a former aide accused him of groping her at the governor's mansion 2 years ago. The Albany district attorney is saying today he does not have enough evidence to secure a conviction. Cuomo resigned last August amid several allegations of sexual misconduct, which he has repeatedly denied. And Toyota tonight dethroned General Motors as America's top-selling automaker. Toyota outselling GM by more than 114,000 vehicles last year. It's the first time since 1931 that the Detroit automaker wasn't the best-selling car company in the U.S. It's also the first time an international brand took the top spot. Experts say Toyota was able to manage supply chain issues and global chip shortages better. All right, next we continue our coverage of the COVID testing crisis as the Omicron variant fuels an unprecedented surge in cases. Many Americans waiting hours just to get swabbed and then days after that to get their results. Tonight, Gabe Gutierrez takes us inside one of the country's largest COVID testing facilities as they work through tens of thousands of tests a day.
With lines for rapid COVID tests snaking nationwide, wait times for more accurate PCR test results are also stretching longer.
I would love to have my results. I want to go back to work.
There we go. Today, NBC News got a rare look inside one of the largest testing facilities in the country. Is this running basically 24/7 now?
Correct. 24/7, 365. We never shut down.
This is Northwell Health's 100,000 square foot core lab outside New York City. These samples were processed just within the last few hours. These arrived just within the past day and are about to be put into a machine like that one. Right now, this lab alone is handling 25,000 tests a day. Of those tests, about a third turn out to be COVID positive. Virtually all, Dr. Dwayne Brining says, are Omicron. How quickly did the Omicron variant really take hold?
From 1 week to the next, it went from 20% of our cases to 80% of our cases. That was about 2 weeks ago, so we're up in the 100% range now. The typical turnaround time for test results here is less than 48 hours. Other smaller labs are taking much longer. So far, we're hanging on, but we're hanging on by our fingernails. Northwell is also launching a new system where patients can track their results by scanning a unique barcode with their smartphones. This tube comes into the laboratory. When it's received here, you get a text message that says your specimen's in the laboratory. But for those still waiting, what would you tell people who are frustrated that we're not further along in testing nearly 2 years into this pandemic? Yeah, I think it's taken a while for government to get on its footing and to have a coherent response to this. I think we're more on the right track now than we were before, but we're still catching up to this.
All right, Gabe Gutierrez joins us now from a COVID testing site here in New York City. You see the lines right behind him. So, Gabe, you mentioned in your story that nearly all the tests conducted were Omicron. How long does it take that lab to figure that out? And if they were nearly all Omicron, this would mean at least in New York City, Omicron is spreading even faster than just last week when the CDC had to revise estimates.
Well, Tom, actually, this lab sends a fraction of its tests to be tested by the state, and that's how they actually decide are able to figure out which one of these cases are Omicron. But what they do say is that virtually all of the samples that they send away to be tested for this Omicron variant come back as, yes, positive for the Omicron variant, Tom.
You know, Gabe, watching your story there, you could sense the frustration there was on the part of the staffers who are doing this testing, the scientists, if you will. So much was made about getting the vaccine out, which no doubt was incredibly important. But it seems like the Biden administration may have had a blind spot when it came to testing over the last year. We see those long lines just there behind you. Was that the sense you got from them as well, that there still needs to be much more infrastructure in place in the U.S. when it comes to testing?
Well, yes, a doctor we spoke with said that, they're still playing catch up here. Now, this lab that we visited is one of the larger labs. Of course, other smaller labs are taking a longer time to come back with these tests. But these large labs, they were able to really get a lot of the reagents, the chemicals needed to really process these tests. So they were better prepared than some. But there's a lot of frustration among some of these workers who are working, 24 hours a day. These labs are open around the clock. And there's still a lot of questions about how long this variant will continue to pose such a problem. The hope is, Tom, that because it waned in South Africa within a few weeks, the same will happen here in the U.S., but that still remains to be seen, Tom.
Gabe Gutierrez reporting tonight from one of those long, cold testing lines here in New York City. And tonight's Money Talk segment is connected to the pandemic, COVID, and specifically the Omicron variant, leading to sick-out calls all across American businesses. And the airline industry in the spotlight because of the holiday travel season. If you're watching us from your parents' home or a strange hotel room, it's because you've been stranded by one of the more than 18,000 flights canceled since Christmas Eve. And as a passenger, you have rights, and just as important, as a customer, there are things you can do. NBC News senior business correspondent Stephanie Ruhle joins us now from 30 Rock. Steph, I like to let our viewers know exactly what happens on this show. And yesterday, you came into our offices, you had that look in your eye, you had a vision, and you said the passengers, they need to get their money back. People are getting screwed all over the place. So if your flight got canceled, and many travelers are in this position right now, what's the first thing they should do?
I came to your office at 30 Rock because I was one of those travelers the day before trying to figure out how to get home. Know that the airline, if they cancel your flight, if they give you a significant, multi-day delay, they're obligated to find another flight for you or give you a refund. So what do? You get the email, your flight's canceled. First things first, pick up the phone and call the airlines. Likely you're going to get a recording that says wait time is 3 hours or 5 hours or 12 hours. You do not want to wait that long. long, you will lose your mind. You give them your phone number, they will call back and hang up. But then you have to take other action. You can reach out to the airlines in a non-aggressive way on social media and say, hey, I'm looking for help. They've got social media teams watching the social media platforms, Instagram, Twitter. You may get a response. You also want to look up other call center numbers on their website. They may have an international call center that could be taking your calls right now. Send them an email in the chat room. They know that this is going on. They've got more support than ever, but this is a huge problem. And if you booked with one of the bigger airlines, they're actually right now even putting some people on their partner airlines. And now that we're through that Christmas week and kids are back in school, it's actually easier to get on flights because the rush has slowed down. So there are more flights. You just have to stay calm. Do not go to the airport and think, I'm going to work it out here. This is not the time to do that.
You know, Stephanie, our family like yours had to deal with those cancellations and also just trying to change flights because our family, you know, contracted COVID during the holiday break. One thing I noticed from having traveled throughout the pandemic was in the early days of the pandemic, the airlines would give you your money back. But now what we found with multiple airlines is they're not giving you your money back. They're giving you credit, which is not really the same because when you rebook, you always get attached those fees that you have to pay in advance. So is there anything you can do now? Can you fight for your money back?
Yes, because what you're talking about is a different situation. Early days in the COVID, or you perhaps with your family, when you have COVID exposure and you need to change your plans. In the beginning of COVID, they were saying, yes, we got it. Everything's locked down. The hotel's locked down. We're going to give you your money. Now, if you're looking to reschedule because maybe someone in your family got sick, you might only get credit, which is a pain. And I want to always remind everyone, before you book a new flight, check and see what credits you may have accrued, because chances are you have forgotten about credits you have. However, if the airlines, which is what we're seeing right now, if they canceled for whatever reason, staffing shortages, COVID issues, weather issues, they owe you your money back. Ask for it.
Stephanie Rule with that great advice tonight. Steph, thank you. Coming up, the activist sent to prison after holding a vigil in Hong Kong. Plus, the landslide at a construction site in China. Hundreds of rescuers digging through debris and machinery to find survivors. Stay with us. All right, back now with Top Stories Global Watch. We begin tonight with the deadly landslide at a construction site in southwestern China. Video showing crews combing through a mountain of debris and heavy machinery that fell onto workers building a medical facility there. At least 14 people have been killed. Several others are injured. 1,000 people joined rescue efforts overnight. Now to Hong Kong, where an activist is behind bars tonight for organizing a vigil. It was set to commemorate the hundreds of protesters killed by communist China in Tiananmen Square back in 1989. That activist set to spend 15 months in prison. It's now the second time she's been sentenced for organizing a similar event. All right, in Chile tonight, 4 beekeepers now in prison for protesting outside the presidential palace in Santiago. The demonstrators putting about 60 hives containing 10,000 bees in front of the building. 7 police officers stung while trying to break up the protest. Those beekeepers demanding their government subsidize honey or raise honey prices as droughts cripple production. All right, when we come back, the perfect match. The wife with a life-saving gift for her new husband after a scary diagnosis shortly after their wedding day. What happened? That couple coming up right here on Top Story. Stay with us. Finally tonight, in sickness and in health, the couple facing a major challenge right after their wedding. When college sweethearts Joey and Lakin Silva exchanged their wedding vows, they didn't realize just how much those words would mean.
We exchanged those vows less than a year ago, talking about death do us part and sickness and health. And I think that was the big one that really kind of hit home was, most people don't expect to have to draw on the in sickness one.
The couple put to the test on that vow almost immediately. As Joey was getting married, his kidneys were failing.
Talking with the doctor, I asked him, what can I do from here on out? And he said, well, unfortunately, there's not really a treatment to slow this. It's just going to progress. I think the hardest part for me was the fact that I couldn't do anything about it. It was just a waiting game until I either needed dialysis or needed a transplant.
A transplant could take months or even years to find a match.
But I realized pretty quickly that this isn't something I can do on my own. It wasn't something I could do on my own. I needed the help of the community, people I love, people I cared about, friends, family, all that stuff. I needed their help and I needed to lean on them to get me through this.
Without hesitation, the people who loved him stepped up. including his new bride.
In the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, well, I'm just going to apply to see if I'm a match. I knew we had the same blood type.
After a battery of tests, Lakin got the call.
I think I was just more in shock, like, no way. There's no way out of everybody that I'm the best match. Like, it just can't be. But I think I was in shock until I got home, and then I told him. And honestly, it was just a huge relief.
What were the emotions like when your wife told you that she was going to give you her kidney?
When your significant other or your spouse steps up to the plate, it's really kind of, it's just, I can't even explain it. It's amazing.
The operation, a real life test of those wedding vows.
It definitely has brought us closer on many different levels.
For me, you know, to go through this kind of a test so early on, and to put all of our trust in not only the higher power and in God, but in each other and the doctors. I mean, I don't think there's much more we can't get through.
Newlyweds who already knew what doctors would later tell them. They were a perfect match. We thank Joey and Lakin for sharing their very personal story, and we thank you for watching Top Story. I'm Tom Llamas in New York. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.